Hi, I'm Michael Lints from Golden Gate Ventures. Golden Gate Ventures is a early stage VC fund based out of Singapore, and we invest in early stage companies across Southeast Asia. My role at the firm is a partner, and I focus mainly on our growth investments, which means Series B and up. When it comes to cap tables, there's a few things that are very important. Um, Reading and understanding a cap table means kind of a few things. It's very important that the cap tables have the most important information available. Things like the name of the shareholder, the number of shares that the shareholders hold, the funding round, pre and post money valuation, and all outstanding shares. The reason why this is so important is that whenever you have either a new funding round or you have new employees coming to the table, in some cases even in regulatory instances, or when you're selling the company, it's very important to have a clear and clean cap table. So one of the things which you would be good to understand when you're reading the cap table is how many shareholders do I see? Large cap tables oftentimes form an issue for later stage investors. The main reason this forms an issue is, let's say there is a change in the company and you have 50 investors on your cap table. It means that you would have to go back to all those 50 investors and get their approval. Those processes take very long and are actually very disturbing for later stage investors because it takes long to make important changes. So keep in mind that the moment you have a larger cap table with more investors, just make sure that you kind of ask your later stage investors to help clean it up. And one way of cleaning it up is putting those investors into an SPV, a special purpose vehicle, with only one representative. That's oftentimes a way to help and alleviate large cap tables. When it comes to today's climate, you'll see that a lot of founders are actually looking to raise bridge rounds. So they'll raise funding rounds in between rounds. And what tends to happen is that a convertible bridge and the discount is not registered properly on the cap table. So even if you have a convertible note, which will convert into equity in a following round, just make sure that you have all this information large rightly on your cap table. This is very important because in some cases it happens that discounts are calculated wrong, which means that you'll end up with the wrong shareholding as an investor, and you'll end up calculating those equity parts wrong as well. Another thing that's important in current times is when you talk about employee benefits, some firms have decided to cut back on salary, but instead of a higher salary, keeping your employee motivated, what you can think of is employee stock. Now, the one thing you want to do right is get your employee stock properly on the cap table as well. So what we're seeing now is that a lot of these entrepreneurs and founders have decided, to sort of, I would say, refund the cap table, which means it might be that the cap table for the employee stock, the ESOP, is depleted, and what you want is you want to add more shares to it, which means that all investors would have to dilute a little bit. So this oftentimes happens in times of crisis or when there's, for instance, a new talent coming on board. The thing that we spoke about the most important things that you need to have on the cap table, but I briefly want to touch upon what are some common mistakes. I think the biggest one would is incorrectly calculating the effects of a financing round. So make sure that every outstanding shares, the pre-money, the post-money valuation are calculated correctly. Double check the shareholding for every shareholder on the cap table as well before going into a financing round. Another item is sometimes missing shareholders when there is, for example, a new funding round, or what if the early investors might have never signed the term sheet or the SHA. they could be missing on the cap table. And that is very important to revisit before you have a new funding round. And then also the dates on cap tables can be wrong. Dates are very important because it determines often at which share price an investor has bought their shares. So just make sure that you get those dates right as well. So what are the terms that actually influence a cap table? I think there's two more important ones that you have to take into account. The first one would be, of course, the liquidation preference. So if you look at liquidation preferences, you have to be very aware that your preference shareholders oftentimes have a preference to the liquidation when there's an exit event. Common times, people see a one-time multiple for the liquidation. What you want to make sure is that your investors mean that they will get their liquidation, that they'll get their investment back one time before any other distribution happen to any other shareholders, which means they have a low priority. This has to be registered right in terms of which investors on the cap table have a liquidation preference. The other one would be anti-dilution provisions. It's very important to understand which investors have anti-dilution protection, which basically means that the pricing for a round. So let's say there's an investment at Series A, and there is a investment at a lower valuation at Series B. Some investors might have argued that they want this anti-dilution protection, which means that they won't go under a certain threshold when it comes to their valuation. Also very important to understand which investors on the cap table have this anti-dilution provision as well. So to summarize, a few things that are very important when it comes to having cap tables. Just make sure you have all funders or all shareholders, including their names and entity names, on the cap table. Make sure which funding round is, after you say this, make sure that you know which funding round you're speaking of and what is the share price for that funding round. The pre and post money valuation is very important. And also pre and post round ownership. How many shares acquired and what's the share value? Is there a case of any discounts in case there's a convertible note? What's the price per share? And do you have an ESOP? And how big is the ESOP? And one tip on ESOP, what you might want to do is hold a separate cap table where you have all employees and all their stock and their vesting schedule. Having their vesting schedule as part of your cap table will make it more clear for all parties involved. One thing that is very helpful when it comes to managing your cap table is using software. So typically cap tables are organized in Excel sheets or in Google Sheets. Luckily, there's a number of tools available when it comes to managing your cap table. I think Carta would be the most well-known one, which is a US-based company, but cap tables across geographies tend to be very similar. So whenever you are managing your cap table or putting together a cap table, think of using a tool. It makes it easier to manage a cap table. It makes it easier to also present and share. But a good habit is whenever you start a company, begin as early as you can with putting up your cap table and managing it properly. Thank you.